Hello and welcome back to Interjections. What a roller coaster of a weekend for Inter. If you're listening to this in need of level-headed, rational, nuanced takes, you've come to the wrong place. I'm your host, Andrew. Jay and Irfan with me. Miko claims to have a job, but I'm not buying it. Jay, what everyone wants to know right now is how are you feeling about Milan's Scudetto chances after the weekend?
How you doing, guys? Welcome back to Interjections. That's a Nicholas Jackson reference for those, if you know, you know. What was the question again?
Milan's Scudetto chances, how are you feeling after the weekend?
Nervous, the breathing down our neck, having closed the gap significantly. Spending every waking moment looking over my shoulder.
Irfan, fly Eagles fly, question mark?
Yeah, definitely fly Eagles fly. I'm glad the Super Bowl is over. I'm sad that the American football season is over. But I'm glad that the real football season is still happening and is well underway, and we are right in the thick of it. So no complaints there. We've survived a little bit of a rough test, and look forward to the next one, which will also be a bit of a test.
One thing I've learned is that the NFL schedule is much more kind to amateur podcasters than the world football schedule. So it's something they should take note of.
Definitely.
So let's get into this. We're going to evaluate these two Fiorentina matches collectively rather than going through them one by one. And much like last weekend's, the tone of our conversation is going to be much merrier than it would otherwise be as a result of a Napoli draw. If you net things out, we essentially dropped 1 point on Napoli over the course of two matches against Fiorentina. And the hot takes after the first Fiorentina match were incredible. Obviously the Scudetto race was over after the first Fiorentina match. I had people analyzing Inzaghi's tenure as an Inter manager and saying one major trophy in 4 years was unacceptable. Everything is bottled. That it was the pessimistic tour for the ages. Jay would be proud of it. So to see the resulting pivots when Napoli draws Udinese on the weekends, and suddenly we're cooking again. The team is gritty. Napoli Lukaku are chokers. Zalewski's the signing of the Mercato. Once again, it's just a Napoli draw changing the perception of what would have otherwise been a pretty underwhelming string of results, because I'm making fun of the overreactions to the first match in this Fiorentina window of matches, but in truth, the first match was a complete travesty. Like, people are calling it the worst Inter I've ever played under Inzaghi, and I agree. It was a disaster. It's as bad as we've looked. It's the most goals we've conceded under him. But it was just a bizarre situation having to play a team twice in such a short window. I mean, Fiorentina barely had any players available to play on Thursday. They had like two substitutes who weren't goalkeepers. And then over the course of the two matches, both teams rotated so heavily. They made a ton of changes before yesterday's match. We were able to bring Barella back into the starting lineup. Thuram obviously went off injured halfway through the game yesterday. It was just a weird situation to be in, and maybe we should have thought more about how odd of a situation this would be and understood that it was going to be an uphill battle rather than a cakewalk, and against what is a pretty good Fiorentina side, a Fiorentina side that's going to be playing European football next year. So, in truth, I honestly couldn't tell you a time we played worse than the first match, but it was nice to see a bounce back yesterday. I'm not going to sit here and say we played great yesterday, and there were definitely nervous moments, especially after the Darmian handball led to the penalty. But Arnautovic, of all people, saves the day, courtesy of a beautiful Augusto cross. And, to get the 3 points to climb closer and closer to Napoli to the point where, we still control our own destiny. We can still get this job done. I don't know if the team has it in them, but we do control our own destiny. Like if we beat Napoli, we'll be top of table eventually. So feeling good overall, but let's just cut to it, Jay. After all the nonsense that transpired this weekend, after, just a crazy 4 days, how are you feeling about Inter's Scudetto chances?
I think simultaneously positive and negative in some areas. I mean, I don't think my opinion has changed that much in the wider scheme of things. We demonstrated what I've been concerned about for a long time, which is an inability to reliably gain points against the upper half of the table. And at the same time, Napoli also confirmed thoughts that I'd had about them, which is that they're also culpable to drop points, and they're also going to have a hard time breaking down stubborn opponents, especially having sold one of their key difference makers and creative sparks in Kvaratskhelia. So, in a way, I guess some existing conceptions I had about both teams were confirmed. On our end, as mentioned, we're not doing great in terms of the big teams. If you look at our record against like the bottom 12, it's pretty much impeccable, actually. Had two kind of crappy draws at the start of the season against Genoa and Monza when we were still waking up, I guess. Other than that, it's been pretty much a spotless record. We've had consistent wins, consistent clean sheets, and there's nothing you can really complain about there. But when you start looking at our record against the top 8, that's when things start getting really sketchy. I think prior to the win yesterday, we had something like 3 wins against the top 8, and then 4 draws and a couple of losses. So it's always concerning when you're not able to win these 6-point games, especially from a lens of mentality. That's generally the perspective I take towards a lot of different things. It's not just 3 points, because 3 points against Como is not the same against 3 points against Juventus, right? Even though they're both 3 points at the end, I'd rather slip up against Como than slip up against Juventus. And the reason for that is, as I'm always saying, these big rivalries, these are not isolated games. These are a kind of ongoing struggle for domestic bragging rights, for the bragging rights between local rivals and between fans and things like this. And these things matter, right? And our inability to consistently and reliably overcome those mental hurdles against the bigger teams is probably the biggest area where we've regressed this season. So it wasn't a surprise for me to see us drop points, especially with the lineup that Inzaghi put out there. I wasn't too concerned about it because, as I said last week, that Napoli were not on our level, and I still think that's the case.
Yeah, the record against teams in the top half, the European spots of the table has not been good this year, with really our performances against Atalanta being the exception, but everything else has left something to be desired. We've talked about the Milan derbies. We all know about what happened in the first Juve match, and I can't really put my finger on what it is. I saw a few people throwing out the opinion that Inzaghi has been figured out tactically in Serie A, but I really don't think it's that, because when I look at the way the team's playing, with the exception of the most recent Fiorentina, the first Fiorentina match, like, we're creating chances. It's been conceding late goals that has been the downfall of us, and I just go back to the individual players, like, being checked out, not being fully turned on as to the main culprits. And maybe as the Scudetto race tightens up, as things kind of get down to a more important, critical part of the season, you're going to see them, step up, take that mentality where, grew so accustomed to them having last year. I don't know. It is a reason for concern, and that's why we'll get into it. This weekend's match against Juve is going to be so important.
I think. Sorry to interject. Well, I think there's some weight to the notion that Inzaghi's been found out. I mean, I won't get into it again, but for me, the biggest issue is complacency. But other than that, I do really believe that there is a notion of increased familiarity against us has contributed to teams being able to pick up points against us, the bigger teams, the better teams, the more competent opponents. And I actually had a look back at some of our games. You have to go all the way back to the game against Empoli, which was, what, 7 games ago, to find a match where we actually started a new player from this season. That means in the last 7 games, we have not started a single new signing. And the lack of fresh blood is so apparent, not just in the names on the pitch, but in the way we play as well. Everyone knows our starting lineup. Everyone can name our starting lineup. It's the same lineup as we played last year, and I've been harping on about this for months and months. But fucking no one does this. The big teams don't do this because you need to revitalize your squad. You need to kind of re-energize the existing guys, and also have this kind of ace up the sleeve to bring off the bench. And you need these variables in the way you play. Otherwise, things get stagnant from a playing perspective and football perspective on the pitch. They get stagnant in terms of mentality and complacency and a lack of competition to keep your place in the squad. And I think that only just contributes, or that all contributes to us being, even if only slightly, more predictable, more easily anticipated, and more easily figured out and counted eventually. So I really do think that's not an insignificant reason as to why the bigger teams have had an objectively easier time against us this time around.
Yeah, I can't argue with you. The only thing I'll say is yesterday was probably Zelensky's best game in an Inter shirt. You need to start using this guy more, especially in the Regista role with Hakan struggling. But I want to pause on that point and go to Irfan. And Irfan, same question to you. After this weekend, after the wild ride against Fiorentina, how are you feeling about the Scudetto chances?
I feel exactly the same as I did before these two Fiorentina matches. I don't think Inzaghi's been figured out. I don't think we are somehow mortally wounded in any capacity. Um, the drama and the ability of Inter fans to like hyperventilate and break down after one bad result is surpassed by nothing. It's unbelievable to me how quickly everything turns to doom and gloom. Like the PTSD of previous seasons is so real with Inter fans that I feel like it's hard for us not to like trip over ourselves at times. Look, the reality of the situation is that that first Fiorentina match was a combination of, in my opinion, three related factors. One is just fixture congestion. Like I don't want to make an excuse about it, but it's the reality of the situation. Like we're playing consistently twice a week. Eventually, that shit just catches up to you. The other thing is what Jay was mentioning about the refreshing of the squad. Um, when Inzaghi is forced to rotate, the way he rotated against the in the first match against Fiorentina in the first match, um, that midfield that he put out there was completely and utterly overrun immediately, and so we just never looked like we were in great shape. And then DeMarco wasn't available, and I don't know. It was just we never looked good coming out in that game. The fatigue was definitely an issue. The rotation was another issue, and we just conceded way too much ground in that match to begin with. Um, the third thing is what I just mentioned now, which is that when you have fixture congestion and when you have not a lot of fresh blood in the squad that's reliable and even close to at par with your starters, the rotations matter a lot. And the rotation in that first Fiorentina match was just way off, and we paid for it. Inzaghi's team selection in that match, I think, cost us that match. And in general, I feel like I don't know, we looked tired, we looked fatigued, we looked uninspired. But I don't feel like that is a function of people figuring us out or Inzaghi losing his ability to like motivate the squad. Ultimately you're going to lose a match if you keep playing this often and with the same players over and over again. Some of your players are going to just have a shockingly horrible match, and that's what happened in that first Fiorentina match. The thing that does concern me a little bit is that we didn't play all that great in that second Fiorentina match either. I mean, I think we played a lot better. We played with some grit, some determination. The squad was definitely a lot better, but Fiorentina still gave us a hard time. And I think that there, I think that with Hakan not playing to the best of his abilities, without DeMarco and Bastoni working their kind of magical connection that I've talked about a lot on the spot, I think it's really hard for us to develop and sustain attacks because of how inconsistent our forwards are. Like when Thuram went out injured, I was like very nervous in this last match. Lautaro also played a really good game. I know we talked about Zielinski, but Lautaro played really well too, even though he didn't score. But we've talked about this on the pod. Like a lot of our offense flows from two kind of distinct avenues. One is the Bastoni DeMarco connection, and the second is that Barella Hakan sort of pivot. And so when either of those two or both of those two are not available, I do think that we're fresh out of ideas in a lot of cases on how to attack consistently, how to generate a lot of chances, and how to finish them. So I don't know. It's interesting. I think that I'm not concerned at all based on the way Napoli's been playing as well. I'd obviously like us to play a little bit better, but I don't think Inzaghi's been figured out. I don't think the squad is finished. I don't think any of that stuff is true. But it would be helpful, like you mentioned, to be able to get Zelensky to actually contribute a little bit more, like he did this last match, to figure out how we're going to use Frattesi in a way that we don't lose the midfield. Getting a key contribution out of someone like Arnautovic or someone like Taremi later on will also be helpful. But it's such a long season, and we definitely need some of these other guys to step up when Inzaghi finally is forced to put some trust into them.
And maybe we didn't think enough heading into the first Fiorentina match about the mental toll that Milan derby would take on us. Those games are always tough. Obviously, we were in a brutal situation having to try and come back and win it late. And Inzaghi made the decision to rest a lot of key guys. And not to go full Miko, but you'd have to think Inzaghi made the decision to bench Barella, made the decision to bench DeMarco with some level of knowledge that the players needed a break. It wasn't, intentional sabotage of him trying to get guys minutes. So maybe we underestimated what that Milan game did to this team, and we basically dropped points against Fiorentina as a result of having to try so hard to, correct our own errors against Milan. These things can kind of bleed into each other sometimes.
Yeah, I think that's true, and I think one of the things that there is, I can't really explain why, right? But I do think that having that like game in hand is like a very tricky situation, and I don't know exactly why it is, but we saw it, a couple of years ago with Bologna, and we saw it now with Fiorentina. There's something about that extra match, that like bonus match that you have to kind of play later on, that seems to be like a tricky situation. Maybe mentally, I don't know. I can't explain it. I've never, I'm not a professional athlete. But there's got to be something to it that like it just becomes kind of a tricky fixture. Now, I will say last thing that Fiorentina do deserve a lot of credit. Like Keane is the type of striker that gives us a lot of trouble because he's one of those like kind of pacey, sort of strong players that if he gets one on one with anyone, he's got a good shot. And he's been playing really well this year. So I do give credit to him. And then the team, though, Fiorentina, is just really annoying. I don't know if you guys felt this way, but watching them play against us, they're so like annoyingly scrappy. And they were defending, especially in this last match, with like six in their back line and then three sitting right in front. So they were blatantly playing for like some 0-0 annoying result or trying to like hit us on the counter, which I guess is, a decently respectable tactic, fine. But like, and then like the way they celebrate every fucking thing, Like their body language and their attitude, and then they're like getting into fights and stuff, and like just being annoying and arguing about everything. Like what an annoying little fucking team that's become. Like I can't think of a team that irritated me more with the way they behaved on the pitch than Fiorentina did, other than maybe Milan. Like that's the only team that also acts like a bunch of children on the pitch, and it's really frustrating to watch them.
I get what you're saying totally. Ranieri in the first game was just like being such a diva. You saw him celebrate after the Augusto goal was overturned. Like
Yeah,
his celebration was a little absurd. And then when he goes and scores later in the match, but also like to that point, like I would take that guy on this team in a second. There were actually quite a few Fiorentina players I would take on this team in quite a second. Like this is a good team, and
it is a good team.
that's
You're
really
right.
the real difference between like this game and the Bologna game from a couple of years ago. Like that Bologna team's blue. Like Arnautovic was the leading striker. They were a bottom half of the table side. Like this Fiorentina team has some talent. They have some players, and they're gonna finish in a Europa League spot or Conference League spot. Like there's a big difference in quality here.
Yeah, I mean they're like I think what 5 or 6 points ahead of Milan in the league, so that tells you everything you need to know.
Tells me Milan's not very good. The players I want to talk about after the matches over the course of the weekends, I want to start. I touched on Zelensky already, but I do want to dive a bit more into that. I really think this guy is better suited to play Regista than Mkhitaryan's role on this team. Just based on what we're asking him to do, it feels like Regista is a far better position for him. I don't know if he's had a great game up until yesterday all season. He has struggled a lot in his sporadic cameos, but everywhere I look, the Gazzetta player ratings, everyone is raving about Zelensky's performance yesterday, especially coming in and replacing a Khan who had not looked great over the course of the match. So I want to talk about Zelensky, and then the big indictment for me yesterday was Taremi, man. The fact that we're at the point Inzaghi is going to Arnautovic off the bench before going to Taremi. And then he had such little confidence in our backup strikers that he gave Arnautovic, he subbed him on and subbed him off to keep Lautaro on the pitch. We have serious questions at backup striker, especially with Thuram now injured. I don't know what Thuram's status is. I don't know if he's going to be ready for Juve or not. And with that being said, like one of these guys is going to be asked to step up, and it sure seems like it's going to be Arnautovic at this point, Jay, just based on Inzaghi's substitutions patterns, based on the goal yesterday, and based on Taremi's complete inability to do anything this season in terms of positive goal contributions.
Interestingly, I am of the opinion that the Arnautovic sub yesterday was tactical as opposed to not relying on Taremi. I still think Taremi is going to be, generally speaking, preferred to Arnautovic in the pecking order, but that doesn't change the fact that he's shit. It doesn't change the fact that they're both shit, to be blunt.
Yeah, man, I agree it was tactical, to be clear. I'm just saying this shows how much little faith he has in his backup strikers, that he's doing a sub on, sub off, as opposed to just trusting them to like do what they need to do, close down people, get the job done.
Yeah, 100%. And going to Juventus is difficult at the best of times, but with Thuram nursing an injury at best and at worst, flat out missing the game, having to start one of Taremi and or Arnautovic is going to be, it's going to be extremely difficult to play optimally against an opponent that is obviously one of our historical most difficult teams to play against, historically speaking. And, there's a lot of pressure on us in that match to get maximum points, or at least to avoid losing and to keep pace with Napoli. Regarding Zelensky, I thought he played well yesterday, and I'm not sure if the Regista role is his best role. Having said that, I don't disagree that he hasn't been particularly great whenever he's played as a Mezzala either, So I'm not just saying this to troll Irfan or something. I prefer him to Aslani as a Regista. There's a more technical player there. There was a moment yesterday where he kind of drew a few players to him and then snuck out a pass to his or to the left flank to free up Bastoni or Carlos to surge forward. And he's full of little technical moments like this where you get a glimpse of his ball retention and his dribbling abilities, which I think are assets that Aslani doesn't quite have, or even Chalanolo sometimes. Chalanolo's not really much of a dribbler in tight space, right? But I think biggest head scratcher from the past two games has got to be Fratesi. And despite being a fan of the guy, it's increasingly difficult to defend his contributions. Like he'll follow up a decent game against who was it? Was it against Monaco or I can't remember who it was, but I think it was against Monaco where Fratesi played quite well. I think he was man of the match. But yeah, and then he follows it up with this kind of thing. So also Lecce, I can't remember, but you get my point. Fratesi was probably one of the worst on the pitch in the first game at the Artemio Franchi, and today he wasn't great either. And I think there's both issues of general lack of suitability in terms of his skill set and also a bit of a mentality issue where and also a tactical instruction issue where he's not getting involved as much as he needs to be. And like I said, part of that's just how he is as a player. Part of it is, I think, down to how he's being used as well. I can't remember who said this, but shout out to whoever pointed this out. Despite both of them coming on in very short succession against Fiorentina last night, Zielinski entered the game with like 40 passes and Fratesi had like 5 or something, and that goes to show the impact upon the game. Obviously, Zielinski is going to get more of the ball in the position he's played, but still, like 5 passes in that time is just, it's not really acceptable. You got to, in the way that Lautaro, to his great credit, was dropping deep, making plays and facilitating our possession and our forward momentum. Fratesi's got to find ways of, if the game is passing you by, wedge yourself in there, squeeze yourself in there and find ways to get involved. And that's where I think that's his biggest shortcoming. That's his biggest failure, because I don't think he's so unskilled that he can't get involved. I just think he's done a poor job of kind of like really forcing the matter and getting involved to contribute.
Yeah, I can't figure the Fratesi thing out because it seems like he's not Roberto Gagliardini, where he lacks the technical skills to really do anything except pass backwards, pass laterally. Like, he's a talented player, and the fact he goes missing in these games, I just have to think it's down to positioning. He doesn't know where he needs to be on the pitch at a given time, or there's some sort of timidness in his game, because he makes these great critical runs into the box, and you'd think that would translate to other areas where he knows like where he needs to be to receive the ball on the pitch to help us build up more an attack. But he just has no interest in being involved. It's always just a case of him, moving away from the action, and we can't. This guy just can't string it together for us. Like, this iteration of Fratesi, I was thinking to myself after the shocker on Thursday, what team could use a player like this? Like a guy who completes 4 passes in a match? Like, no one can use a player playing at that level. It's not tenable. So there's something going on here. I don't know if it's mental. I don't know what it is, but it doesn't matter what team he's on, Inter, Fiorentina, Roma, he's never going to be impactful. He's never going to be a regular contributor if he keeps disappearing, running from the ball, and not participating in build-up play. Irfan, any thoughts or any players you want to call out their performances specifically over the 2 games?
Yeah, I think I agree with you guys on Zielinski and on Fratesi. Like I mentioned earlier, I think Lautaro had a really good match this last match. I thought he played really well, even though he didn't score. Other than that, I don't know. I really miss DeMarco, though I do think Augusto has played really well. I think Augusto, especially in this last match, played really well. And man, that guy has he has a good shot on him. Like, he has these instincts to like get shots off and get them on target. And that's I don't know, it's kind of refreshing to see because I feel like so many of our other players, including our strikers, sometimes are just unable to get shots on target. So I think, props to him. I think he played pretty well. It was nice to see a Cherby back, and he seemed to kind of pick up where he left off. I don't know, I don't know how much more we can really rely on this guy, but hopefully we can ride out the season and he can give us a little bit of a boost on the defensive side. But overall, no. I mean, I think I think this was more just survival, honestly. I think Fiorentina are a good team. I think they had a good game plan against us, and it was nice to bounce back after a horrible, horrible loss. Not downplaying how bad that loss was, but it was nice to bounce back, though not super convincingly. And in terms of like standout performances, I just hope that Taram isn't injured, at least not seriously injured. And I'd like to see DeMarco back because I really do think that a lot of our offense flows through those guys. Um, I also thought it was kind of it was kind of weird how bad Bastoni was yesterday. Like, especially in the beginning of the match, so many of his crosses were so uncharacteristically off, like just like booting it out of the pitch. So that was a little bit strange. But otherwise, I think people performed pretty well yesterday. I did at least see some grit and determination yesterday, and the team was fired up a little bit when some of the more kind of controversial, aggressive things were happening on the pitch with a really kind of annoying, undisciplined Fiorentina team. So I do give the players generally some credit. And you could tell also on the sideline how fired up Inzaghi was from like the very beginning. Like he did not look calm and collected at any time during that match. From the minute the starting whistle blew, he was fired up. So I don't know if that's necessarily a good thing or a bad thing, but at least he was up for it.
Let's get into this Juve derby coming up this weekend. So we're finally, for the first time this season, really bearing the fruits of our labors. We put in a strong performance in the Champions League group stage. We got a top 8 spot. Juve did not, which means for once we're going to catch a short team on short break. We'll get a full week off to rest, recover. Later today, Juve have a Champions League. I don't even know what this round is. Is it the round of 32? They have a game against PSV in the Champions League since they didn't finish in the top 8. So they'll be coming to us on short rest, and we have a nice built-in advantage there. Unfortunately, though, that's kind of where the advantage stops. It's a game in Turin, which we all know our track record there. It's horrendous. We have Thuram nursing an ankle bruise, they're calling it, and we don't know what his status is going to be. Obviously, we need him to recover in time if possible. But we're going into a match against a Juve team that is I don't want to say revitalized, but maybe playing a bit better than they were earlier this year when we caught them. They brought in Colomani from PSG on a dry loan during the winter mercato, and he has basically taken Vlahovic's job. I've caught a few of his games for Juve, and he has started most of them over Vlahovic, and he's scoring goals. And not all the goals are super impressive technical goals. One was basically an accident where a Juve player took a shot and it deflected off him into the nets, but he's scoring goals. He had a really nice one against Como last weekend, and he's definitely the danger man right now in attack. And we've seen enough times that Inter struggle against these kind of spry, quick attackers with good positioning, and he's someone who they didn't have obviously the first time we played them, who I'm worried about heading into this Juve fixture. With that being said, though, it's not like this Juve team's a juggernaut. They're still down in 4th place in the table. They honestly should have dropped points against Como on that match I referenced. They were bailed out by a ridiculous penalty at the end of the game, and there were times during that second half where Como looked dominant. Como had 2-3 great chances, early in the second half that would put them up in the game that they just couldn't take. So it's been a weird season for Juve under Thiago Mata. They have been draw merchants to the nth degree with 13 draws and only 10 wins. It's hasn't been the beautiful attacking football you thought we see out of them. It's been a lot of, 0-0s, 1-1s. But like I said, they have picked things up a little bit in the past 2-3 games ever since they brought in Colomani from PSG. So it's going to be a difficult task. And like I said, we're not exactly going to walk into Turin and think we're going to play our best game. I think back to our Scudetto under Conte, and I believe it was at Turin we beat Juve 2-0 with Vidal and Barella goals, and it really changed the trajectory of our season after we beat Juve. Right? Was that at San Siro? Okay.
Yeah.
Regardless, it really changed the trajectory of our season. Beating Juve had that kind of, psychological edge for us, and we never really looked back at that point. It's when I think back to the most important matches of the Conte era, that's probably number one for me. So I think much like how we had a bad letdown performance after our draw against Milan, we're in a situation here whereas if we play poorly against Juve, it can have a domino effect and impact our other matches. It can go a long way towards us not having a successful season. So we really do need all 3 points here. But man, our track record against Juventus is nothing to be proud of. It's been a struggle these past few years. Jay, how are you feeling heading into this game?
Yeah, cautious is the word I'll use. I agree with what you're saying, that obviously traveling to Turin has been historically extremely difficult for us. Having said that, I think Inzaghi's record in traveling to Turin is probably better than most Inter coaches. It's funny you mentioned the victory we had against Juve. At the time, they were the defending champions, if I'm not mistaken, that season where we beat them 2-0 with goals from Vidal and Barella. That was obviously our Scudetto season, but prior to that, they had won the title under Sarri, I think. So this is a different Juve. This is a Juve that hasn't won the title since then, which was 2019-20, I think. And generally speaking, Juve does not really go 5-6 years without winning a title, So it's a Juve in transition. It's a younger Juve. It's a Juve that are still coming to terms to a new era. There's a lot of youth being used, obviously a new coach and all that. But very frustratingly, it feels like I get the feeling that that's not going to matter much. I still feel like it's Inter against Juve, and all these factors, all these considerations that I've just mentioned won't really come into play. And that's what we saw in the first leg as well. When we went 4-2 up, it felt like a kind of reflection of where these two teams are, right? Inter's a tried and tested championship squad, defending champions, putting this new in progress kind of Juventus in their place with a dominant performance, and then all of a sudden we shit the bed and it's back to pre-Calciopoli days where we were mentally Juve's bitch. This opponent, this fixture just has a habit of doing that to us, regrettably. So I'm very, very wary of this game. And one of the things that's given me a biggest headache is that, we're talking about Thuram's injury situation. Even if he is fit, Thuram has been pretty poor the last handful of games. I don't know if you guys agree, but I feel like maybe since the Monaco game, not great. He's been very guilty of over dribbling. He's been making some poor decisions, guilty of playing too pretty and not being direct enough. I feel like I'm sensing some frustration in him as well. His body language, the way he plays, and his kind of reactions to things happening on the pitch. He just seems a little bit, I won't say on edge, but I think he knows he hasn't been able to play the way he wants to for quite a while. And even in the Monaco game, aside from the assist to Fratesi that he had, I thought overall he was... So no, it wasn't the Monaco game, it was a Lecce game rather. Yeah, going back to the Lecce game even, I feel like even then, other than that early assist, I felt like, he wasn't able to kind of to put his best foot forward, and so that's causing me some strife, I guess. One of their star strikers is injured, and even if he's playing, I can't really trust him to be in great form right now. So I'm kind of in the same situation with Hakan as well. I know that he's not 100% match fit, and there's a question of should he start or should he not? But even if he doesn't start, even if he does start, like based on the last few games he's played, I'm not particularly enthused by the prospect of, or by what I've seen in the last couple of games, rather. So, yeah, there's both fitness and selection headaches, I think, for this one. Again, that's against the kind of contextual background of this game just being a historical nightmare for us. Despite what some people may say, I remain hopeful that we can kind of overcome, and we can, I guess, take that mental leap and finally put in finally get a win against one of our biggest rivals. Again, we're yet to beat Napoli, yet to beat Juventus, yet to beat Milan this season. That's what, one, two, how many times do we play against Milan? 3 times. That's 5 games against the big opponents, at least on paper, without a single win, which is, there's no two ways about it. It's shit. So hopefully we can finally kind of break that, get that monkey off our back, simultaneously get a lot of monkeys off our back, actually, get the monkey off our back in terms of our poor record against big teams this season, get the monkey off our back regarding, the historical mental fragility we've had against Juventus over the years, and simultaneously kind of break the streak of poor form for some of our key players, because we're going to need them to start performing like immediately.
Irfan, if Thuram's unavailable to go, who are you starting at striker in this match? And are there any other start-sit decisions you were looking for in the lineup?
If Thuram's unavailable, I think you go with Taremi in this one. I think you can bring out Arnautovic later on, but I think, unfortunately, we got to play a little bit more controlled here, and it'll be like all hands on deck sort of team performance, and I feel like Taremi's probably better for that. I don't know. In terms of squad selection, otherwise, I think we go with our best starting lineup. Hopefully, DeMarco's recovered from the flu or whatever he had. He should be good to go and well rested. Probably still won't last more than 70 minutes, but at least he'll be well rested and he can play. The midfield has to be that starting 3. Can't take any chances there. And then, I'd like to see Pavard. I think every time Pavard's played recently, he's played really well, made very important defensive stops. So I'd like to see him play as well. But otherwise, yeah, I think you go with your starting lineup. I'm nervous about this match. I think mainly because, of course, it's the Derby d'Italia. You got to be nervous about it. And Juventus have, owned us for quite some time now. But what worries me about Juventus, what's really frustrating about this particular Juventus team is outside of the Champions League, they've effectively only lost 2 matches. And one of those was the semifinal to Milan in the Copa, which ended up with us, having they played Milan in the semifinal and they lost. So that was annoying, losing to Milan. And then the second one, they lost to Napoli. They dropped the points to Napoli. They couldn't even the draw merchants couldn't even get a draw against Napoli. So that was really frustrating too. So as far as I'm concerned, just to keep pace, we have to get 3 points. So I'm really looking forward to the team going out there and putting together a good performance and trying to get a win. But I also agree with you, Andrew, that with the new signing of Colomani, they've looked a lot better, and he is the sort of typical striker that gives us a lot of trouble. And Juventus is not a team that typically leaks a lot of goals, so it's going to be a tough match. But I expect us to put our strongest starting lineup out there and try to get the 3 points.
Just want to point out as well, I guess, the parallels in approach to the market. Kolo Muani is such a just perfect example. 6-month try loan, comes in, makes an immediate impact, and I guess you can say Zalewski had an immediate impact as well with his Derby assist. But get what I'm saying. We lack something like this, and although we're fresh off a Arnautovic goal, I don't think that changes the trajectory of the issue with the strikers. I mean, Colin Mawani already has more goals than Arnautovic, Taremi, and Correa combined in 4 games for Juventus than these guys have. So it was just it shone a light where on some comparatively good versus bad recruitment in the forward department.
Yeah, look, I love Morata as much as the next guy, Asilio as much as the next guy, but if you cannot describe our management as bold or creative, like they tend to go for the safer options. I don't think they could go outside the box. Like we're always joking when it comes time to sign a player, we can usually float some Serie A player names out there and get a pretty good guess of who's going to be on our target list for transfers. Like this is not a particularly creative Mercato team. And when I see the Colomani signing, like if I was in charge of Inter, what I would have been trying to do this winter was loaning out Taremi and saying, it's not working. We're going to go find you somewhere to go. We'll pay part of your wages if we have to. Not like they're that high. We're going to get you back in your goal scoring groove somewhere else. And you'd look to take a free hit on someone like Colomani or just insert player. You find another struggling striker at a different club. João Felix is another great example. You just find someone who's struggling and you hope that a change of scenery can get them going for you. And simultaneously, you're trying to accomplish 2 things. You're trying to jumpstart Taremi's career again by giving him a change of scenery, and you're trying to reinvigorate your squad. You're trying to make yourself better. Maybe we just completely lack the financial ability to even do something as low cost as taking a player on loan. I don't know. But this is the type of stuff that a creative management team would be pursuing. Instead, we're too polite. We tell Arnautovic, hey, you can leave if you find something, but he doesn't actually want to leave. We tell Correa, we don't freeze these players out of the squad. We let them hang out. We let them, fire up the barbecue. And as a result, they're collecting their fat Inter salaries, and we're struggling to figure out who's going to be starting against Juventus. So if the Mercato is over, the window's over, pretty much Zalewski is going to be our only impact signing. And I think it speaks to the lack of creativity of management where Juve go out and, they obviously reinvigorated their entire squad this summer. It didn't work. They're not very good. So they say, okay, we're going to keep at this. We're going to try and make this even better. And they go out and they find an impact player who's now, immediately one of the best goal scoring forwards in Serie A since he joined the league. Meanwhile, we're just kind of rolling with our mistakes and hoping they're going to figure things out. It's the difference in approach. There's no boldness. There's no urgency. If you want to use Jay's word complacency, it said, hey, don't worry. We're going to win the Scudetto despite the fact we have 2 tenable forwards. I know we're up against it here from a timing perspective, but I do want to get your guys' thoughts on something, which is just big game against Juve this weekend. In a vacuum, independent of everything, do you hate Juventus or Milan more? I asked this question mostly intrigued to see what Jay's going to have to say, because I know we all know about Jay's obsession with Milan, how they're always in the Scudetto race. He thinks about them as he falls asleep at night. But there's a few interesting dynamics with this question, I'd say. One is the obvious baggage of the cheating history of Juventus. I mean, Calciopoli and the likes in the mid-2000s. And it's probably hard to recover from that. Not to mention just the blatant favoritism in refereeing decisions and the inability for us to beat Juventus for the longest time, a large part due to some of these refereeing decisions. But then on the other hand, you have the insufferability of Milan fans. And I don't know about you, Irfan, I interact with Milan fans online a lot more than I interact with Juventus fans for whatever reason it is. Maybe because there are a lot more Milan fans in English-speaking countries. and just the entitlement we talk about, the just being convinced their team is the best. These players are the best in the world. The Arsenalness, as Jay likes to call it. Where do you fall in this equation, Irfan? Do you have
Yeah.
more a dislike for Juve or Milan?
Yeah, it's interesting. So I think historically, I understand our rivalry with Juventus, and there were so many times where Juventus just dominated us so much, and yet I just maybe it's because I'm not a you know I haven't been an Inter fan for 30, 40 years, but to me it's not really that close because and I'll give you two distinct reasons. It's not just about feelings, right? So two distinct reasons why I hate Milan a lot more than Juventus. Number one, whenever Juventus, in most cases, when Juventus has beaten us, like they have better players, usually a better manager, they perform better, and they beat us, and you say, okay, I get it. They were a better team. Like a lot of the times. I'm not saying every time. And recently, we've evened the scales a lot. But a lot of times when they've beaten us, it's like, okay, they were the better team. They have better players. They just dominate us. Like, I get it. I know my place when it comes to Juventus in a lot of cases. The other thing is, Juventus fans in general, at least the ones that I've interacted with, are are much more Serie A fans than I think Milan fans are. Like Juventus fans seem to have a better appreciation, at least the ones I've met, of the fact that like, hey, we're representing the Italian league. It's about Italian players. There's a pride in the league. There's a pride in their team, and as a result, like they tend not to be so hyper focused just on their individual players. Like they have appreciation for players on other clubs, and they're not so obnoxious in their fandom. Now, I know about all the scandals and all the favoritism and all that other sort of stuff that goes into the history, and yes, it's very irritating. But I don't see the obnoxiousness in their fans, at least sitting here in the U.S. And sitting here for the period of time that I've been an Inter fan that I've seen with Milan. Milan fans have been generally insufferable about their team. They think their players are the greatest players of all time. And in the U.S., because of the U.S. contingent now with Pulisic and Musa, it's like it's all you hear about. Like all you hear about is Milan and how great they are, and then you have like pundits in the U.S. talking about how Pulisic is like a top 10 player in the world, and you're just like, what world are we living in where people are trying to seriously make this argument? So for me, it's not really close. And on top of that, there seems to be this like infiltration of like Milan lovers among Inter fans, which just drives me crazy. Um, yeah, exactly. And so that I was just like, man, like there's universal disgust for Juventus in our fandom. I feel like, but then this like kind of I'll say this like this creeping Milanism that exists among Inter fans sometimes, I just have zero appetite to deal with. And that just drives me, I think, even further into the I hate Milan category. Even though like the few Milan fans I've ever met, like that I know personally, I actually really like them and they're very nice people. And they're very reasonable about giving Inter praise and things like that. But man, as a fan base, the general, I guess, online and media presence of that fan base is absolutely insufferable.
This reminds me a lot of like when you read political New York Times op-eds about the people who are like, yeah, the Republican who lives down the street from me is completely nice, but those ones online are the extremists. Those are the ones who are really causing problems. Side note, please edit that out.
No, I think that makes sense. And the one last thing I'll say is, again, it goes back to that first point I made about Juventus. Milan is not good. They're not a good team. Like I don't understand why people hype them up. They have a few individual players that are good players, okay? But even their individual good players are not some transcendent players. They're not. And so I cannot understand why people hype up the Milan squad. There are maybe two players on that team, maybe three, that I would consider starting level players at Inter, and that is literally it. And so I don't even want. I don't understand the Milan hype and the inflated ego of Milan fans because it's completely unwarranted. Also, looking at the table, they're like seventh, basically tied for eighth. So like they should just kind of know their role and shut up.
I'm going to go full boomer here and say I do think there's a certain forum member I'm thinking of who has an absolute hatred for video games, especially football video games. And I do think Milan, more so than other clubs, is the benefactor of like those 12 to 16-year-olds, man. Like Milan is a sick video game team. The pace, the tenacity, you can put those guys, you can run in straight lines, do a few nice dribbles and score with them pretty easily as a seasoned FIFA player myself. So I think that's definitely a good reason why people clamor for these Milan players, even though they don't actually produce results on the pitch. It's, man, they're sick in video games. But no, I get your points, Irfan. I do, but the institution of Juventus is too much for me to overcome, and it's why I hate them more. It's just we talked about kind of how Milan fans always think they're awesome. I'd say what's worse is the Juve fans who always think they're the victim. You know, Calciopoli was a Facchetti inside job. It was, Inter were the true masterminds of it. It's just when a refereeing decision goes against Juventus, it's as if, the entire league's out to get them because nobody likes them, which I'll give them that part. Nobody does like them. Truly, all non-Juve Serie A fans hate Juventus. That's something universally we can take in stride. So for me, the institution of Juve is too far to overcome. But Jay, I'm really fascinated by what your answer is going to be to this question.
Incidentally, I'm split down the middle. I agree that Juve are the old enemy. They will always be the old enemy. They will always seek to destroy us and undermine us at every opportunity possible. This is a club that is still, to this day, appealing the Calciopoli decisions in every court or every tribunal possible. This is a team that has institutionally cheated and gamed the system and influenced the system nefariously through ill-gotten means. I don't think I need to give the listeners a history lesson on Moggi and all the corruption that came to light during Calciopoli. And you're right, there's a sense of detachment from reality from a lot of Juventus fans when you bring up Calciopoli. They will never even contemplate or entertain the idea that, hey, maybe we were guilty, and they try to gaslight and dilute the discourse, the diatribe with wild takes like all guilty or non-guilty. I remember the mother of all calls where they tried to pass off Facchetti's voice recording for someone else's voice, and they were trying to claim that this was a recording of Facchetti asking for a certain ref when it was just simply another person, trying to besmirch the legacy of a dead man. And like I said, Juventus are the cancer, right? Having said that, Milan are like like the dog shit that's just been laid at your feet. Like regardless of any long-standing rivals or enemies, you still need to kind of take care of that dog shit immediately, right? It's right there. It's stinking up the place. It's the more urgent matter. So in the short term, I agree with what Irfan's saying. I think, I don't know, man. I just can't. I still haven't gotten over this wild detachment from reality from the Milan fans in that post Berlusconi era. Like I still remember seeing Milan fans just going on about how Andre Silva was better than Icardi, Romagnoli was better than De Vrij and Skriniar, and they're putting up their fantasy lineups with Andre Silva behind Modric and supported by a midfield Christmas tree of Milinkovic, Savic, Modric, and Isco, and things like this. And It was just so, I don't know, there's something like wildly distasteful from it. I feel like Inter fans have had the benefit of having to suffer through the the farce that was FFP and all the accoutrement of that, the severe financial restrictions, the kind of coming face to face with a net zero market and all these harsh realities. Whereas I think Milan fans kind of had the opposite, and there's some resentment there for the fact that they managed to avoid this deserved punishment. And the classic example I always point to is their breach of FFP, right? And the settlement agreement, like going back to fucking Mazzari and Mancini days, we were under a settlement agreement where we could not register new signings for the Europa League. And, obviously every season we're aiming for fourth place or third place. Back then, I think there was a period of time where Italy only had 3 Champions League spots guaranteed. So we're aiming for fourth, we're aiming for third, right? And naturally, we're coming up short because teams like Napoli, Juventus, and Roma back then were far better than us. I remember getting routinely destroyed by Nangolan. And this was kind of at the height of Sarri's Napoli and so on, right? And Allegri's Juve, of course. So, yeah, we aim for third, we come up short, and we finish fourth and end up in the Europa League. And that's not optimal because obviously the Europa League back then, you're playing on a Thursday, Friday. I guess we still are, but playing on a Thursday, Friday, more games, more injuries, more traveling to like the corners of fucking Europe, going to Baku, Azerbaijan, and all these other former Soviet, Eastern Bloc countries in the middle of nowhere kind of thing. And that takes a toll on you. And we had to kind of suffer through that. And every year that we participated in the Europa League directly coincided with a lower place in the league finish. We'd finish fourth in the league, qualify the Europa League, and then finish 8th the following season. Then we'd finish 4th again, qualify for the Europa League, and repeat the cycle, finish 7th, and then so on and so forth. Milan kind of avoided this, and I remember them going broke for 4th place and splashing the most out of any team in Europe. I think this was back in 2017, and they bought Piontek and Lucas Paqueta for 70 million combined, and in a flagrant just fuck you to the FFP restrictions, because their plan was, we're going to splash the money now on these 2 signings, qualify for the Champions League, and then use that money, that income, to kind of offset the breach of FFP. They failed, right? They failed to finish in the top 4 that season, and they were caught in breach of FFP, and they made this fucking voluntary withdrawal from Europe as their punishment. Like, what kind of shit is that? You worm out of a punishment in a manner that effectively benefits you, directly benefits your attempt to qualify for to focus on the league and qualify for the Champions League. And naturally, when you've done the hard yards and had to go through all that shit, it's very, very distasteful to see your cousins, your retarded cousins, getting away with that kind of favorable treatment. So it's a long-winded example of how Milan fans were actually saved the brunt of FFP and never had to kind of come to terms with it as hard as we had to, despite being in a similar or at times worse financial situation than ours. On top of that, their change in ownership from Yonghong Lee to Oak Tree Management, getting owned by a distressed asset fund, the most notorious and nefarious distressed assets management fund on the planet, Elliott Management. And what happens? I'm not saying that they would have been stripped for parts and sold like a used car as a husk or anything like this. I don't think that was ever realistic. I don't think that's realistic for us either, obviously. But at the same time, realistically, you would have expected a bit more of a stringent financial management from Oak Tree. Sorry, I keep saying Oak Tree, from Elliott Management. But instead, what you see is fucking Paul Singer's son, Gordon Singer, or is it the other way around? Gordon Singer's son, Paul, has remarkably taken a liking to Milan all of a sudden, and they decide to basically absorb all of Milan's debt. And for them to get away with this to get this massive freebie, this massive let off is just like, are you fucking kidding me? Like the kind of luck that these guys have had in the past 10, 8, 9, 10 years is just obscene. And the worst part is that they don't even realize it. They don't realize or appreciate how lucky they got with all these favorable things going in their way while we've had to just kind of suffer through it. And so, like I said, there's naturally going to be some resentment there. And, despite the ever-present cancer that is Juventus as an institution, the last 10 years are the last 10 years. They're the most recent 10 years. And for that purpose, like I said, I'm split between the middle. I think in recent history, I have a severe bias towards disliking Milan more than Juventus, just because they're the ones that are more in your face and the more kind of presently annoying. Whereas, historically, there's no question it's Juventus.
Yeah.
You go ahead, Irfan.
I'll just quickly add. I think the other thing for me personally is, I was late to the Inter train. A lot of fans became fans when Inter got Ronaldo. I actually became a fan of Inter after we got Ibrahimovic, or soon before we got Ibrahimovic. And so Ibrahimovic was a huge kind of part of my early fandom of Inter. And to see how cringe he is now, especially with Milan. Maybe he was always cringe, but like just to see him now and the way he behaves as a Milan stooge is so frustrating for me personally. And so it's that also just tilts the table now. I'm like, you do remember, dude, that you played for Inter. And he just doesn't seem to give a shit. And all he does is talk about and praise Milan. And I understand he's on their payroll, fine. But even before that, all he would do was just like talk about Milan and shit on Inter. And I just like, it just really irritates me. And he's also so loud and cringe about it. It's hard to ignore.
He's still salty at the fact that he left us to win a Champions League with Barca,
Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
obviously we knocked his Barca team out en route to winning the Champions League. Lesser known fact, it's understood that he actually asked to return to Inter, but we declined. And
Oh, wow.
and then obviously, as history would have it, ended up joining Milan on a cut price deal, which was a bargain for them, and promptly won the Scudetto with them. And since then has been, obviously held a grudge against us and has been a Milan guy through and through. I think, despite, I'll never ever believe him on this, but I think the fact that he never won a Champions League really, really, really bothers him. And so naturally he put two and two together, inability to win Champions League, the fact that we won the Champions League in spite of him, and then hurt his ego by not letting him come back. I have no problems with the fact that Ibrahimovic hates us.
Yeah, and then there's just no one like that on the equivalent side of Juventus who's just like flooding the airways with shit the way that Ibrahimovic does. So that's another factor.
Especially now that you hear less and less from people like Modji as time goes on. Like anytime Modji opens his mouth, it's just like you want to slap the guy. But thankfully, he seems to have just learned to keep his mouth closed, or people have stopped interviewing him in the past, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 years. So we're hearing less and less about Modji and his wild claims about him being innocent and all this kind of stuff. So.
See, I hated Ibrahimovic. Like when it was clear he was going to leave Inter, I was ready for him to go, and that was the point when I emotionally broke up with Ibra. And it actually had me thinking over this past weekend. There was a big trade in the NBA where the Mavericks traded their superstar player to the Lakers, and it was immediately reviewed as one of the worst trades of all time. So I clicked on an article and it had like, what are the football equivalents of this? And the example they cited was Eto'o and 40 million for Ibrahimovic, and with Inter immediately going on to win the Champions League as the closest equivalent. Jay, you also touched on something which, and I know we're up against it, but the I think if you were to rank the intelligence of the fan bases of these three sides, like self-aggrandizing, I think a lot of my Inter community online. I think there are some cynical, pessimistic yet beautifully intelligent people out there in the Inter community. Whereas I view Milan fans as by far the dumbest of the trio. Like, these guys don't understand anything. They view football once again as a video game. Where I was thinking back, I can picture the graphic in my head of Modric and Milinkovic Savic supporting, Andre Silva or whatever. I can remember when they were like, if there was an elite player in the world, like Milan fans have the audacity to think Pep wants to go and manage them at some point in his career, or like Jurgen Klopp was going to be the replacement when they got rid of Fonseca. Like, that's just the way Milan fan is built. And I think because so many of them were like glory hunters who latched on in like the 90s and the 2000s when they were playing well in the Champions League, they kind of attracted the lowest common denominator of human being. And as a result, their fans are just dumber than most. But yeah, to them, like everything, Milan is the be all end all. And despite their like complete lack of success the past 10 years, of course, Jurgen Klopp wants to come manage Milan still. I mean, we're the best.
Yeah, I think the older generation of Juve fans have that kind of obnoxiousness and that, like I said, the refusal to entertain even the slightest possibility that they were corrupt, or they try to kind of hash it over with this, for lack of a better word, Italianism of, it's all gamesmanship and everyone was doing it and blah, 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 this kind of thing. I think that's the kind of older generation of Juve fans. I think the younger generation are a bit more down to earth. And for what it's worth, I think at the end of the day, all fans are very, very, very similar in terms of, their respective biases, their respective takes on their rivals and everything. Everyone's going to hate their rival fans. And I can only imagine what Milan and Juventus fans would say about us Inter fans. They're always crying about this or that, always whinging and Marotta League and this and that kind of thing. Like I said, for me, where Inter fans get a bit of a pass is, since Maratti sold the club, we've gone through the Tohir era, the Suning era, and now into the Oak Tree era. And we've been forced to learn so much financially, understand so much financially, while taking the, for lack of a better word, the honorable path of staying or trying to, meet the rules. You can argue there's a bit of naivety on our part for rigidly, obeying these rules, while others were like, yeah, they're going to change the system anyway, no point following them. So we say for a reason, Inter fans have become accountants in the last 10 years because we've had to absorb so much knowledge about FFP and the books and amortization and all these kinds of accounting and financial restrictions. So I think it's made Inter fans quite a bit grounded in terms of how we view transfers, how we view finances, how we view just the economy of football. And I think that's always good, right? To have a informed fan base who is knowledgeable about the realities of the football market and economy. I mean, I watched some AFTV equivalent Chelsea fan thing once. Some clip came up on Twitter a few years ago, and some guy was demanding that they terminate Lukaku's contract. And I'm like, are you guys serious? You bought him for 115 million 6 months ago. The sheer lack of football financial education among some subsets of fans is really shocking to confront as a fan base who has been forced to endure that education. I wish I was oblivious to it too. I wish I could just say, hey, let's sign fucking Bellingham for 100 million, and then our club actually doing that. I wish we could do that. I wish that would be us, but the reality is no. We had to undergo this kind of forced education of the harshest realities of football economics. And so, like I said, for me, it's very very annoying that a lot of Milan fans in particular, through sheer dumb luck, they avoided the harsh realities of those lessons and just remain as kind of, blissfully ignorant as ever. That's always bit annoying to see, but like I said, at the end of the day, I think all fans are more or less the same.
All right, real quick, Irfan, 30 seconds or less, Derby prediction.
Oh man, I'm going with a 1-0 Inter win with a goal from Lautaro, or 0-1, I guess, as Miko would say.
Jay, what do you got?
I'm going for a 1-1 draw. I think I'll give it to Lautaro. He scored against Juve recently, so I think he scores first, but then I think Colin Moani equals it up. And yeah, unfortunately, I think the game ends 1-1 draw and we lose some ground on Napoli. I think Napoli beat Lazio. Actually, Lazio beat Napoli in the reverse fixture, and it's away at Lazio, so it could be tough. But actually, you know what? I'll revise that part of it. I still think we'll draw 1-1, but I think Napoli will also draw at Lazio.
Yeah, I also have a 1-1 draw. Too many scars from this fixture for me to confidently predict a win, especially with Thuram hurt. I'll also go with Lautaro goal. Give me a Yildiz goal for Juventus, because every time we play that guy, we turn him into Cristiano Ronaldo prime. All right, we'll wrap there. We'll be back next week to recap what happened against Juventus. Hopefully Miko is courageous enough to show his face this time. Until then, Irfan, take us away.
Forza Inter.
That's right. Catch you all later.